We're now going to talk about the history of the ODT-AP. So it was originally developed back for version 4, SP3. We created it for the specifically for the ability to have a Check-Stub-Stub layout. So we had just found that there was a lot of time being taken for folks who had this particular check layout. Back in the day, NAV only had one report layout. They didn't have the other combinations available, and we spent a lot of time just developing something over and over and then aligning it for folks. So that was the primary driver. Then what we had done is kind of through the life cycle of the add-on is that we started adding some of our additional customizations that we were doing for customers, one of them being Miscellaneous Vendor. And then we would have another customer who wanted to be able to do MICR checks or magnetic ink, so printing your own check to just a plain stock out of many companies. So what we did was we bundled a bunch of those solutions that we had been developing over time and kind of labeled and called it our Advanced AP solution. So it started with check and just evolved that we started incorporating some additional features and functionalities that we found as a typical request. And again, we've continued to carry it forward simply because of our client and our partner demand for the add-ons, so we've continued to push that forward. So again, we have that available for NAV 4 all the way up to NAV 2016. So what are the differences and why? So again, the primary one is the ability to print to plain check stock and use your own MICR if you would like. We have the ability to do electronic signatures. So if you have those business requirements where perhaps there's a lot of low dollar value checks that are being sent out for $10, $15, just as an example, and in your organization you have a particular signer who comes in every 2 weeks and you're finding it stressful on the business to try to clear out and get the approved and the manual signatures on some of those low dollar checks, well, this is an opportunity for you to implement the add-on to allow it to just print that particular user's signature using the add-on here, so that then it saves time when issuing checks. Another reason for the Open Door add-on has to do with separate remittance. So what we can do is, out of the box, standard NAV actually prints the details that fit on your stubs, i.e. 12 lines of invoices for the vendor, and then voids that check and then continues printing to the second check page stock, and then printing the additional details, and then with the final total on the second check. And then the expectation is you're sending the vendor 2 stubs along with the check. Okay, so what we had found is that that's using up a lot of check stock and folks wanted it a different way, so that's where our separate remittance report has come in, whereby when we print the entire check run, it then stores the additional stub detail and then will prompt for an additional report to be printed out, of which then you can print to a different printer or tray to plain paper. And then you just collate those checks with the stub and then send those off. So then you're reducing your paper waste and being more environmentally friendly, of course, and reducing your overall costs for check stock. The blank check stock, of course, is for use with our MICR. But then what we can also do is, in comparison to the NAV standard, is that the pre-printed check stock is always expected for the standard checks. They don't have the MICR string and MICR font enabled, so typically we see that as one-off customizations that and customers have to manage themselves or with their partner. Manual check signature is always there. There's other alternatives or solutions that you could be looking at, and some of those can become quite expensive. So I'm thinking of, particular check signing where there's keys involved and physical printer units that are dedicated to that. Now, if that's a requirement, of course, then you can look at that, but this is a lower cost alternative to doing automatic check signatures. And that with the one-time vendor situation is that if, in my example, I'm using Joe's Pizza Parlor that I'll show you, but if I have Joe come by to drop off a pizza and it's the first and only time I'll ever use him, Well, in standard NAV, I would have to create a vendor code if I want to be able to record that as an invoice and cut a check against that. So this is just a handy way to be able to use one vendor code for processing one-off type vendors that you typically don't transact with on a regular basis, saving you time and management. So an overview. So the advanced AP check, the ability allows us to select different check layouts, including Check-Stub-Stub, Stub-Check-Stub, Stub-Stub-Check, so the 3 different layouts, and that we can still leverage, of course, the standard check object reports. And so the standard one being a long stub check, which then we can also, though, with some slight modification, you can change your layout to show you just a check with a single long stub at the bottom too, if you wish. But it requires a little bit of layout changes, and that's something that I'm going to work to show you as well, as promised. So continuing with the overview, it's just to request the separate remittance at the time of check print at the end. So if there's stub overflow, that's what that is. Menu option to print separate remittance if that report was not run for some reason immediately following the check. So that's just something that what we had is or needed was the ability to store that, is that if a user just bypassed the prompt and then said, oh, oops, I need to print those remittances. Well, there's a report out there that lets them get to that to reprint it if they've bypassed it for whatever reason. The other check numbering, void checks no longer use up a check number. So there's some ways to commit checks that we can do a bit differently to avoid showing them in the register unless you truly are voiding the whole batch. Print check or print MICR lines on checks, print company logo on checks. So what that is, and along with the address information, but what that allows us to do is order a single blank check stock for many companies, and then within those companies and or bank accounts we simply define those, set them up, but you're using one paper stock, saving you cost. And then the advanced check tab in purchase and payables allows us to customize how we want the actual check layout to be printed or managed on a per bank basis, or sorry, in a company basis. And then again, we can set it up by bank account. The automated check signature allows us to automatically print signatures on AP. Now it also says payroll check here on this slide, but we don't handle the standard Serenic payroll check out of the box, but it can easily be added. And then the bank accounts can be individually set up for 1 or 2 signatures, along with check limits for controlling what the dollar value is set to be. So i.e. signature 1 is allowed to print if the check is $10 or less. In my examples, of course, my amounts are going to be a lot higher, but this just is a way to secure down, and then it just simply prints the check and does not show the signature if that amount of the check is over the signer's signing authority. Essentially, there is upper limits too, whereby then it just simply prints a plain check and requires manual signature of 2 signatures. So that's how that works. Miscellaneous vendor, we can do that for invoices or credit memos. We can pick or create or define a miscellaneous vendor by different posting groups if we wish. We can assign a default, of which I am. But then you record that purchase invoice, you record the details, the address information, and then when you use the suggest vendor payment process, it will pull that transaction in and cut an individual check per miscellaneous vendor transaction, and again, saving you time. All right, so this is just a little bit the background on what I was just discussing there, but that the navigation works, so you can see the navigation of GL entries and vendor ledger entries and see the specific information that was processed for that particular check. And at that point, we're going to step into the demo, so I'll review that now with you. And then again, we'll take questions following that. So I'm just going to go again to my demo environment. I'm going to close my ODT-IC demo, and I'm going to go to my ODT Advanced Payables. So in this case, it's just a version tag of AC. So if you hear anybody talking about ODT AC or ODT AP, they are the same. It's just that it started with the check and evolved into something that included more payables. So just to show you the purchase and payables setup changes that we've made. So on this particular setup, then we have added the advanced check feature. So within here, what we do is we can set or have you select the AP check that you wish to use. These base ones are the advanced check. By picking these, what it's doing is it's modifying for you the report selections for bank accounts. Okay, so this is just a simple way that in our system we can choose, are we going to use the base checks in this particular company, or are we going to leverage the advanced check capability and allowing for the different configuration that we wish. I can create and then assign a default miscellaneous vendor, and in this case, for my demo purposes, I've made one for MISC, and then that's the vendor number that I would use, and then record my particular purchase invoice. I can select a default check format if I wish, and in my example just for today, I'm going to pick Check-Stub-Stub. And I can choose my different AP date formats. So do I want, MMDDYY, or what configuration, or do I want custom? What are my separators? Do I want to show hyphen or no hyphen? If I choose custom default formats, then I can actually use some boxing and physically print or do not print the boxes. So an example like this might be in your check stock where you have faint boxes to align the D and the M and the Y's to, well then this is a way to actually have that print the boxes or print just the numbers and then you align to those boxes on your physical check stock. So that's all there is in the purchase and payable setup. So next I'm going to go to my bank account and just show you what my setup options are. So I'm going to select my WWB operating. And in this example, what I have done here is I've just turned on or enabled my automatic banking signatures with my auto sign limit. So my upper limit is 20,000. And then I assign what signature for this particular bank is my first and my second signature. I can decide whether I want to print the company logo on my check or not, and then I put in the bank address information that I want to appear when printing checks for this bank in this company. I've enabled or decided to turn on my MICR, so this is just to show you an example of what the MICR would work like. And then again within the documentation, though it just has these different characters A, B, C, D, and then it equates to the different MICR symbols or characters that are used to separate transit bank number and account number as an example. And then all we're doing is we just put in the number of spaces and whatnot, so you type that in to determine what the string will be. That's really all the setup is, so I'll just show you a signature card just so you have an opportunity to see what that looks like. So again, I can create multiple signatures. I can then assign up to 2 signatures on a bank card, and then I can decide on a name and then control what signing limits this particular auto signature has, and then I just scan in and save those images as a picture against my card. So for security purposes, what you can do is then take away from various folks the ability to manually edit these particular records to lock them down. All right, so I've done my payable setup. I will just show you my miscellaneous vendor. And this is pretty straightforward here. But in my miscellaneous vendor, all I do is I turn on my miscellaneous flag. I do not fill out, therefore, my address information or details because that's going to be unique per transaction. I do need to record the whether that's going to be default tax liable or not, what my various posting groups are. So perhaps I'm just going to set NBC here. Okay, and then I could then use this as my particular miscellaneous vendor account. And again, I've turned a default on, but I can have multiple in here if I wish to have different setups, i.e. perhaps I have a miscellaneous vendor requirement for Canadian versus US vendors. Well, I can do that if I want. Now, how to process that is I simply do a purchase invoice. So in this case, I've already posted one. So what I'm going to do is just use new. And I'm going to use my copy document. Use my copy document. I'm going to pull in a posted sales invoice or posted invoice. So in this case, posted purchase invoice for my miscellaneous vendor. And in this case, I use Joe's Pizza Parlor. And I would just like to kind of show you what it looks like. Now, I've already posted one, so I'm going to leave it alone. Probably don't always pull this up from copy document all the time, but so in this case I'm just called the local pizza place and I'm going to have them run down and deliver a pizza, so I don't do that all the time. This is an example just why I would use a miscellaneous vendor. But in here then I'm going to punch in all the address information that I need to print on the check. And then I record my line just like I would a regular purchase, and then I posted that entry. So with that entry posted, now I can go off and do my payment process. So within my bank batch or my bank payment journal, I then run my suggest vendor payments. And in this example, I'm just going to restrict my run to just be the 10,000 and my miscellaneous vendor for my example. But of course, I could widen that up if I'm doing a large check batch. In this case, I'm going to run through, so it's just a normal process. But the first thing that prompts for us is whether or not I wish to run a pre-check register report. Now, in standard NAV, when you run and suggest your batch, this report is not typically available. Now, if you're an end customer with NAV and you would like to be able to print, well, what is in my payment batch and what's going to be applied, this is a handy report that we've added in. There is something in the background in standard NAV that you could discuss or find and then add to your menu. This report is just adding a bit more additional information and ability to allow it to print whether you're using summarize by vendor or not. Okay. In this case, I am not running by summarize vendor. In this case, what I'll do is I'm going to hit yes, I wish to see that report. I'll preview it to my screen. So what it's doing is it's going to give me a bit of a report that we like to use as an approval process. For which lines do I want to run my payment batch for? So I can come along and show this to my approver and they're saying, okay, I have London Postmaster, I have these invoices here, I have the pizza invoice, yes, okay. And maybe what they do is they sign off and stroke out what they don't want to pay. Well, then what we would do is we would have, perhaps in this case, I'm just going to delete a bunch of them. And I will delete these ones. Sorry, I need to delete my lines. Now I'm just left with the two invoices I'm going to pay for my two different vendors, and then I can simply reprint that register report and then attach that as my amended document, or perhaps I want to put that right through the approval process and have somebody sign off on that. So with that report in hand and ready to go, I'm now prepared to run my actual check batch. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that. I'm going to print my checks, and down here you'll see that I'm selecting to use my Check-Stub-Stub report format for this particular check run. And I want to run a separate remittance. Now, in this case, this isn't going to fire because I don't have more than 12 invoices. If I did, when I'm all done my check print, it'll pop up a message just saying to put in my plain paper and select my printer to continue processing with the additional overflow remittance advice information that I would collate and attach to my stub and issue with my check. In this case, I'm now going to select to print just a PDF so I can see it on screen. And in this example, I do have an issue with my check intentionally left. So what you'll notice is now I get with my check information at the top, I have my signatures along with my check stub details. So this is, again, is Check-Stub-Stub format. Now, something I want to draw your attention to is that you can tell that actually the MICR string is in the wrong position. So this is where I just wanted to show you the ability that you have to change the layout of your checks without requiring NAV, specifically NAV development affecting your NAV object. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I notice that this MICR needs to be aligned. So what I'm going to do is I'll just I'll void all here just so we can redo it. But I'm going to go in NAV to something called Custom Report Layouts. In Custom Report Layouts, I have added our ODT Advanced AP Check add-on. I can import, export, but also edit. So in this case, what I might want to do is export the layout before I make my change to save a copy of it in case I need to roll it back. Then I can simply import that. In this case, I'm going to select Edit My Layout. I wait for the Report Builder tool to fire, and so this is a tool that can be installed on a machine. It's automatically included with the NAV client installations and server clients, I believe. But from here now, we actually can see the RDLC report layout of that particular check. So now in here, and something that you should just be aware of is within our add-on is that we have multiple layouts in Report Builder. So there's actually 3 templates overlaid. So to get to this, to get to this particular layout, what I would do is I would select it, and then I can send my layout to back until I find the layout that contains the particular stub, in this case, the Check-Stub-Stub layout, or do I want the Stub-Check-Stub, and then I can edit the fields. It gets a little confusing in here, but it's doable. So within this MICR, I'm now realizing that I have to maybe center it, and I might need to kind of micro align it up or down, or whatever I'm doing. When I've done my layout change that I want to now test, I can close that. Yes, I've successfully revised and do want to import those changes in. Now what I could do is export the layout. So as an example, maybe I'm doing this layout and configuration in a test database or test company. I could then export the layout and then go into my production and import the layout. Now that I have my custom layout designed and modified, I need to assign it. So I go to Report Layout, and I can go to Report Layout Selections. And in my example here, I'm just going down to my 23 billion range or whatever it is. Just have to wait for a moment for the report to run or load. This is where, though, I can have specific layouts, okay, for specific reports in specific companies. So I can even have a different layout if I wanted to in my USA company versus Canada. So what I've done here is I've just selected that I want to use a custom layout, and then I chose the copy of the one that I had made and now revised. Okay, so that's all I've done, and all of these changes have not overwritten or revised the original NAV source code. So when my folks go to do a grade, they're just updating that standard object, and then again I have my layout changes that will float over top. So I now have those changes. I'm going to now go back to my payment journal, and I will just rerun my print because I voided it, and I'll PDF that just so we can see on our screens. And I'll open it, and now I have that my MICR is floating in the middle. Oh, it's now a little too high, and I would simply repeat that process until I get my MICR aligned for my bank testing procedures and or get my signatures lined up on the line.